Oh, you left my heart wide open. You threw it on the ground. Oh no, but where it is now, it's waiting to be found. But then last night I tried to call you. It rang once, then straight to voicemail. And my heart, it can't take this hurting. In the meantime, I'll be searching. I'm gonna keep on searching. I'll be waiting. Maybe I'll hear you say it. Oh yeah, I'll be waiting. I'm waiting for. I've always been so optimistic. See, I'd push through thin and thick. We used to risk it all, but now it's all down the drain. And we used to stay in our lane, but you left me with the pain and the shame. The shame of being some old fool. Oh, now what was the rule?
Bonjour, Kenawea. Linus the cause Animki Mayangin Dotum, Latso, Netonji, Gogiskamanzi Dotum. My name is David Wilkinson Samard. I'm from the Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance, and I'm the Northern Ontario Regional Director. And I'm here today to introduce to you some wonderful speakers. And today I am speaking to you from the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory in the land of the Animki Waju, the people of Fort William First Nation. So very honored to be here today and very honored to have these speakers here today. We'd like to welcome you to the Indigenous Performing Arts online workshop series. Today's workshops will be a presentation and discussion about managing teams during a pandemic with human resource experts, Jeanne LeSage and Laurie Marchand from the Indigenous Theatre in the National Arts Centre. Our sponsors today are the Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, and Department of Canadian Heritage. So with further ado, let's get started here. Well, I'd like to introduce Jeanne LeSage. She's an arts consultant with 30 plus years career starting as a theater stage manager, working for 10 years at the Toronto International Film Festival in the theater productions and human resources. She has 6 years of international arts projects, including the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, the Abu Dhabi Film Festival, and the Royal Opera House Muscat in Omagh. Jeanne is a certified human resource leader, holds an MBA in human resources, organizational effectiveness, strategy, and facilitation. Jeanne is a very sought after speaker and a trainer, having delivered sessions on strategic human resources such as organizational development and effectiveness, performance management, policy development, workplace harassment, and respectful workplaces. And more, Jeanne is a proud volunteer board member of the nonprofit Volcano Theatre, Department of Imaginary Affairs, and SM Arts Stage Management for the Arts. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Jeanne, and let's have a good day, and let's get things started.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And I'm just thrilled to be here and Just a very quick note before I share screen and all of our screens go haywire with slides. I'm very honored to be here. I am a settler living here in Takaranto, and I'm very grateful and proud to live, work, think, and play here. And I'm very honored to be here to work with IPA and the members. And I'm going to share screen. So we'll just take a moment to do that. And welcome you all here today. And I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I want us to have some time to get to our very, very amazing guest, Laurie Marchand. I'm very, very excited to have her here today. I'm using a lot of very, very's this afternoon. Just a couple of notes as we gather. My pronouns are she, her, and you're all welcome to share with each other on the Facebook chat how you would like your pronouns to be displayed. This is on Facebook Live. We are recording the session. If we have a Q&A, we'll look at how we can make sure that we can share together. I wish we could all be in the same room. I miss seeing all of your wonderful faces and for us to talk and learn together. A lot of this learning, there's information that I will provide to you, but really we're going to learn from each other. Ways to engage today. There will be a chance to have some chat and Q&A. You're going to post your questions on Facebook and they will come through to myself and Laurie. You've already heard about me. So I'm going to bring together some info. We're going to talk about how do we manage our people systems during COVID? How do we manage teams? I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like for all of you. You're all leaders of your organizations, whether they're small, large, whether you have lots of team members, small team members. You might also you might be a supervisor, the leader of the organization. How do we lead on these uncertain times? And then want to make sure we've got a really good chunk of time to have a conversation with Laurie Marchand and a Q&A. So it'll be a chance for you to ask some questions. I need to sort of say this first. Please note that this session is informational only. So this is not legal advice. This is not HR advice. I'm very, very happy to work with organizations to improve your people systems and your HR systems. Sometimes it's good to also know when it's good to get external expertise that's very specific to your organization. All right. So let's step back. And there's obviously the conversation about managing people systems in COVID is a very, very large conversation. And you are all dealing with many, many aspects of dealing in this pandemic. Overnight, we changed what our programming is. We've had to close our venues. Maybe we've opened, maybe we're looking at outdoor. We've moved to digital. We've learned new things overnight. And in the midst of it, you're working with your boards of directors, your staff, you're doing cash flows on a daily basis, looking at new funding instruments. Then there's the people side of things. So we're going to focus on that part that's about people. And here we go. So just to help, because when we start talking about the people side of things, and I'm sure as you're talking to your peers and your colleagues, it can become such a large topic to really think about how do we respond to COVID, the pandemic, with the human side of things. So I want to offer 4 different areas to look at for you to kind of start to think about what are the types of things that you should be thinking about for managing your teams. And I know a lot of organizations, depending on who's coming here today, you may have an HR person or access to HR. Many don't, especially in the arts. And so really kind of I want to focus on how you can kind of provide some of these resources for yourself. So what's the first major issue? The first major issue that we often have to look at are some specific and pretty complex legal and personnel issues when it comes to manage your team in the pandemic. Then there's just the getting work done. And I want to focus more on that today. There's a lot of pieces that are about, so we've changed these things overnight. So how do we work now? What are the ways that we can come together to kind of keep getting our work done? And then I think a very important thing for us to discuss is about employee wellness. How are we all doing? And how are we ourselves doing as leaders? And then the 4th bucket I will suggest to you is the long range consequence of COVID on our people systems. I mean, long range, we've been chatting about this for a year. We're in year 2 now of the pandemic. So what's going to be short term? What's going to be long term? So those are the areas that I'm going to suggest that we chat through right now. Okay. So in that first bucket, and I will say that, again, when we're talking about legal and personnel issues, please make sure to find out, depending on your province and territory, what the jurisdiction is for your own employment standards, things like that, and what's specific to your organization. So what are the kinds of things that you might want to be thinking about when it comes to your teams with legal and personnel? First of all, health and safety. Now, lots of different organizations will have different thresholds in terms of what you need to be doing on health and safety. So, and it's often depending on the size of staff you have, whether you run a venue, what are the kinds of hazards and risks in your organization. So part of it is we need to be thinking about the health and safety, ensuring the safety of what is called workers in the language of the Health and Safety Acts. And so in some cases, and it's going to be very different according to who's here on the call today, you know, depending on the province or territory that you're in, some folks have not been able to open up and do any shows or art or gatherings at all. Some have been open outside, some have been open on a limited basis, closed again. So in this first case, you will have some things that you need to think about if you have any of your team working in person together. So obviously social distancing, PPE, which is the personal protective equipment, vulnerable workers, the right to refuse unsafe work. So you need to be thinking about the health and safety if you are gathering people together. Then on the other side, you might have a situation where folks on your team may have been diagnosed with COVID, or maybe they need to go into self-isolation due to potential contact or contact. And, you know, also understanding what is it that you need to do for those folks that actually need to take a leave because again, they've been exposed to COVID or need to self-isolate. The next thing to think about on the legal and personnel side is job protected leaves. So, and the one thing I will say about this is this has been a much fasting. It's a fast moving target. Some of these things are changing quite a bit. So I'm gonna give you some examples and some tips of where to look for the most up to date information. Because again, depending on the jurisdiction that you're calling in from, this is going to be different in different provinces and territories. So in some cases, you've got job protected leaves in case one of your team needs to leave, whether it's for illness or they need to care for their family. We've seen some instruments like infectious disease emergency leave, declared emergency leave. In Ontario, just like last week, we saw a new Canada, actually, no, this is national, but it will filter through the provincial jurisdictions, is a new Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit. And again, I just bring these up so that you're aware of them. And if you think that there's a case in here that you need to look at, you can try to navigate your way to find more information. In a lot of these cases, they're job protected but unpaid leaves. So similar to you, if you look at maternity parental leaves, those are a case where an employer doesn't need to pay them if they take the leave, but you need to let them take the leave and their job is protected so they can come back. We may also see when things open up, when international borders open up, and I know so many artists are just ready, they just want to get touring again. And also even within Canada, between provinces and territories, what are the kinds of legal and personnel issues that will come up when we start to be traveling again? And then human rights. And it's important to kind of be aware of what might come up on the human rights side. Now, prior to the pandemic, you know, we've all as organizations been dealing with making sure that we have a workplace that's free of discrimination. And then on the health and safety side, looking at having workplace harassment policies and procedures. Now, in terms of COVID, what you might see is more accommodation requests from team members. And also, you know, some issues around discrimination and harassment when it comes to what's happening with the pandemic. So again, these are the kinds of things that might come up. Then on the job side, you might have a case where you're looking at alternative work arrangements. Again, our operations changed overnight. Some folks are doing way more digital. All of a sudden, some of the staffs, there may be some tough decisions have had to be made, and the team has contracted, and there's less staff. So we've had to change all of our work arrangements. So people are looking at different duties. All of a sudden, if you're not putting things on stage, but you're doing digital, you might be doing a lot of new a lot of new things. You might need to look at how your employee agreements and contracts are matching what that is. You might be looking at compensation changes, because we've also seen a lot of cases where folks may have had to reduce hours or do things like that. So you need to kind of look at what is the legal side, and then the very, very tough decisions that have had to happen in terms of layoffs and terminations. And then systemically, of course, aside from the pieces I'm chatting about, individuals who've been applying for CERB, CRB, organizations applying for wage subsidies, possible recalls of laid off staff, and the CEBA interest-free loans. So how do we do this if we don't, there's those billable hours with lawyers can be expensive. I have found that there's a number of different resources out there. A lot of the law firms have created COVID-19 resource centers. I've given you some examples here. We will share a version of the deck for you, so you'll get this after the fact. There's also in BC, the Artist Legal Outreach, which is connected with PLEO, which is the Pacific Legal Education and Outreach. They've been putting a number of resources there. I've given you 2 examples here that are Ontario examples, Matthews Dinsdale, and also Williams HR Law. And Williams HR Law is both an HR consultant as well as employment lawyers. Now, again, back to that jurisdiction piece, look for one of these resources that's in your province or territory, because you want to make sure that the jurisdiction is the right one for your organization. So that's the legal side. So now let's talk a little bit about getting work done. So, in the realm of if you know what your new programming is, you're going digital or you're doing gatherings outside, how do we work now? So the getting work done, how is it that we're going to work together, and what are we going to do? And this section is this is subtitled Office. What office? So we know that there's a new reality for the new arts office. We moved to remote workplaces almost overnight. Now, a number of small organizations have been doing this for a long time already. So they were already set up with file sharing and how do we handle emails and how are we communicating and making decisions. But for some organizations, if you've got a hard server, we have that one computer and that's what the finance system is on, how do we manage that new arts office, which we moved to remote overnight? Now we're also a year in. So a lot of these things I'm talking about now, you may have already made these changes. Like, you might be like, listen, we already went there. What might be interesting for you to do is to think about all those changes that you made really quickly, identify if this is still the right way to go, take a breath and go, okay, is there anything that we need to adjust and tweak there? The other thing to think about for your team is not just about how we move to be a remote workplace, but I think we're all very aware that everybody's home office experience is very, very different. And we need to kind of just be very, very conscious of, for each of the team members, the home office environment is going to be different. For some folks, it's a very positive environment and it's easier for them. They don't need to do the commute and they like being in their home space. And in many scenarios, people may not have adequate space for that home office. They may have dependents to care for. So you'll notice they'll get a good hour and a half in during the day, and then they have to wait until after bedtime after their kids have gone to bed to kind of do more work. And, and also in some cases, for some, home is a challenging place. And even just something as structural as, is there decent internet? So we know that when we move to remote workplaces overnight, it's a very different experience for different people. And also back to having the right tools and the right communication systems. Have you landed on the right tools and systems for what you need to get done? I get asked a lot, should we do Slack? Should we do Asana? Should we do, and I say, do what's best for your organization, make it super clear, and then make it really consistent. And we probably moved to some things really, really quickly back in March, April, May, and then maybe again in September. So it might be good to reevaluate. So the thing that we very quickly put in place, is it still working? Should we do a little refresh on it? What should we do? The other piece that I like to really think about, and we're going to chat about this when we're talking about managing your teams, is organizational capacity. I think it's really interesting for us to think about right now in a pandemic, how much can we actually get done? How's our productivity doing? How do we decide in this time of pandemic, as well as, the pandemic, we went into lockdown pretty quickly in March. We've also had social justice movements starting up in May, June, and we've had a number of things happen in the past year. And I think we need to be honest about how much we can actually do. I think we in the arts, we're really good at getting a lot done with a small amount of resources. And I think that's amazing. And that makes us the unique folks that we are. And it makes us really great at what we do. I think it might be really good for us to kind of go, how much can we keep doing? And I think that's a larger, tougher conversation, but it's one I think it would be great for us to start thinking about. Now let's talk about managing people, a little bit more about that productivity piece. Is for some people, their jobs have changed up. So what is my job now? Is it going to keep changing? We all know that because the finish line sort of keeps moving, and because we don't know what we're moving to and what is the future, the job roles might keep changing. So we need to be conscious of that to kind of say, with the folks that we still have on staff, what is it that they're going to be doing and for how long? And back to that same conversation about productivity expectations, kind of understanding, is everybody going to still be able to have the same level of productivity? And how do you, as a person managing your team, I know you're faced with a lot of struggles on the side. Well, the organization, you're juggling the resources you have and trying to make changes and trying to innovate, as well as kind of seeing how's your team doing with all that. And I think with all of this, especially now that we're in the long run, this is no longer just 3 months, 6 months, we're now into the second year. Does this bring up conflict within the organization in terms of that ever-changing roles? Is there clarity on the roles and just the impacts of stress that's happening on the planet right now? Does that kind of bring up some challenges in the workplace? So when it comes to communication, there's a couple different things I'd like you to kind of think about. One is for you as managers and leaders, how real should we be with staff? And I'm going to share with you a model that talks about a little bit about how you look at being a leader in uncertain times. But I know for a lot of folks, it's with your team, you want to kind of motivate and energize them. But how honest do you be with them about all of the challenges? And I think it's a real balancing act that leaders need to do right now. Then when it comes to staff, how do you manage staying in touch with your staff? Are you on camera? I know we're all on camera all day long and it can be exhausting, but if they're off camera, do you kind of know how they're doing? How much is the right amount of communication? Should you have weekly full staff meetings? Are you having one-on-ones? I think you really need to see what your team needs according to the work that happens. When it comes to the productivity piece too, I think it's important to kind of think about, we may have been accustomed to, well, if we all came in at 9 o'clock and we were all at our desks until 5 o'clock, which I know is not exactly how an arts organization might always work, but we're very accustomed to the person's at their desk, therefore they're working. We need to think a little bit differently about that. So we need to kind of think, so how is it that I am sharing with my team members what I need them to get done and how am I keeping on top of that? Because we've already said people all have very different home office experiences. So therefore they may need to do things in a different way. So therefore focus on what is it that you need them to be working on and what do you need to get them done? The other communication piece that I think is really interesting to kind of think about is what I call the water cooler or the hallway chat. All the communication I'm chatting about is, how do you make decisions? How do the teams come together? How do you kind of get your work done? But I think we all know that there's that secret connected sauce of that connectedness of when you're with people. There's both the social side and the social connection of chatting at the coffee maker, but I think also from an art point of view and a work point of view, there's also something about that brainstorming and team building and ideation of ideas of when folks are kind of coming together and just chatting informally in the hallway. Because now with remote workplace, I feel like communications become formal. And I'd like to kind of think that we want to look at replicating that thing about just being in the hallway and being together and chatting and innovating. The wellness piece, I want to kind of move on to just to kind of, because I think this is an important discussion for us to think about, is this third bucket, looking at wellness for employees and wellness for leaders as well. I will often, when I work with organizations, be really mindful for, if you're a manager or supervisor, there's a way to be an empathic, empathetic supervisor and manager, but also keeping those barriers of what's personal, what's work, what are those kind of lines and boundaries that we should kind of think about so that a person's private life is their private life and their work life is their work life. When it comes to the pandemic, I'm starting to readjust my lines on that. I think just because we need to kind of make sure that folks are okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the challenge and the approaches for you in employee wellness. So first of all, I will say it's important for the senior leader to take care of their team along those lines that I was chatting about, and also take care of yourself. It's also that thing about putting the oxygen mask on yourself before the person beside you. We know, as we've talked about, the reality of working from home is not normal in most cases. So this will add to some challenges and stress and can be a detractor from their own wellness with their home life. We know that folks are balancing and integrating child and family commitments. And a lot of the research that's coming out is showing that when there are stressors, some good ways to kind of to work through it is to have good physical health, staying active, and eating healthy, and having social connectedness. So what's our role with our staff? Do we need to kind of make sure they're walking around the block and eating healthy? Do we need to kind of make sure they're having social connectedness? I still think you can find that really good sweet spot of keeping those boundaries up in terms of personal and professional, but I think it is a time for us to kind of really look out for each other. So how do we do that? I think also what we're seeing is that, the challenge for anyone experiencing mental health issues has been really amplified in the midst of the pandemic. So what should we do about that? From an organizational point of view, if you have an employee assistance program, which is that 1-800 number, confidential phone calls, it's a way for your staff member to have access to somebody outside of work that can have immediate confidential counseling. Now, I realize an EAP, employee assistance program, is not always within reach of orgs' budgets, but if you're really close, now's the time that you might consider that an EAP might help you out. And in some cases, if you have a benefits plan, you might have a version of an EAP, or you might be able to add it as an extension. So I know, for example, the AFBS, the Actor Arts and Entertainment Plan, has LifeWorks as an add-on to their EAP. And I don't want to promote or sell our product, but if there ever was a time to think about an EAP, if you really need some help to get your employees to have some support in their life outside of the workplace, now is an interesting time to look at that. There's also an extended research piece that I wanted to share with you from CAMH, and it's called the Mental Health Playbook for Business Leaders. It's a very in-depth look at extended strategies. So it might be interesting for folks that really want to dig into that. So what is that line for the manager? And that's the last thing I'll chat about in terms of this piece on the wellness side. Again, if you have staff members, they seem to be struggling, they may come to you, they may not come to you. What is that line? What are the boundaries that we should kind of think about? And I do kind of, again, want to say we're managers, we're employers, we're supervisors. So it is important to kind of maintain somewhat of a boundary, but again, kind of, balancing that with us being people that want to kind of make sure that everybody's doing okay. So what's the line? In the midst of the pandemic, do we pursue things a little bit more? If you're witnessing something that you're seeing that's happening, that if it looks like one of your team members having more challenges, a really good rule of thumb, and this came from a gentleman named Carlo Estevez, and he's a counselor with Morneau Chappelle, who's an EAP. And on another seminar, I asked him the question, like, what's the line right now? How can we advise managers about how much to delve into what's happening with personal issues versus, because you're also balancing, you need to get work done, but you're also worried about these people, and what's going on. And he had a very good analogy that I think is very, very helpful when thinking about how to approach this. So what Carlos was saying was, think of an iceberg. So for any person, what you display at work can be seen as the part of the iceberg above the water. So that's the part. Below the water is all that stuff that's at home, and it could be home and family and community. It can be any number of things. That's for them. That's them and their personal space. That part above the iceberg is probably that's the tip of the iceberg that they're displaying to you. if you see uncharacteristic behavior in a person, and I think we all know with the pandemic, we were really good at kind of changing and innovating and hustling. And then it just became the sprint became a sprint, and now it's a marathon. So it's interesting where resiliency can there can be cracks in the surface of resiliency, and it might come up at the times that you don't, because that are very surprising. I think we're all really good at putting a show up. We're all very good crisis managers when it comes to getting to that opening night with an audience. This is something that none of us have ever had to experience before. So if you see uncharacteristic behavior in a person, that's a signal. But don't start below that waterline, i.e., and I'm just going to use this example, don't say, are you having trouble at home? That might be something that you're aware of, and it may be a very generous question, but again, that's going below that waterline. Instead, really talk about that behavior above the waterline. From seeing you in meetings, I think you're having some challenges. Is there something that I can do to help at work? And if they decide to go down the waterline and express more, then it's like you can respond by having some empathy and helping them find resources. And again, it's not for us. We are not trained therapists or counselors, although some folks might be. Our job is to be their manager. We can try to help access various resources to kind of get them help that they need. And I realize it's a balancing act, and I'm asking you to do everything. I'm asking you to figure out the productivity, what you need to get done, and have everybody's jobs change, and also be looking after each other to kind of see how they're doing. So just the last bucket, and then I want to be able to kind of get on to our conversation with Lori. That fourth bucket is talking about long-term. And I'm referencing here some info with permission of Lise Labine, who's an amazing Francophone and Anglophone HR consultant working in the Gatineau region. And she was really starting to put together what should we worry about for the ongoing longer term issues for HR. So I think we know there will be an end to this pandemic, and there will be a time when we gather again. So, we've had to spend a lot of time making changes and adapting to what's happening now, but it's important that we start to think about what's going to happen again as we ramp up and gather again. Organizations will be changed. Some will be stronger, some will be weaker, none will really remain the same. I think we know the organizations we're all going to be in a different state. We're going to need to look at revisioning of jobs for stability in organizations, and even all those fast moving, well, now we're doing this and now we're doing this. So how do we organize those jobs? The one thing that I think it's important to, step back and take a breath about is we've had to make tough decisions. There's no doubt about it. Businesses and organizations and arts organizations and boards and leaders have had to make tough decisions. And when it comes to your team, people will respond to the way they were treated. Even when tough decisions have had to roll out, how you roll those out, that level of gentleness and respect with people as those tough things are being carried out. People will remember how that happens in the pandemic. And this is a very important thing. And I think also that generosity will also, you'll find that will be a generosity to yourself. I think we've also seen people may be making tough choices, actually in some cases not tough choices. They might need to leave the industry, they might leave the area. So folks, I know if they're leaving the city and they're going to go live with family and friends in other places, people have relocated. So what does that mean when we gather again? Will we actually need people to come back to the office, or can we actually go, you know what, the remote thing kind of worked, or we might need to look at a shift. We may need to continually look at a level of retraining, professional development, and different succession plans. When we gather again, I've heard a lot of organizations talk about, the expansion of the digital of what they do. I mean, I think that's clearly what's happening with a lot of folks. So do we need to kind of look at professional development of our existing staff because now our organization is going to move in a new way, or are you going to bring in folks that have that skill set? And of course, for folks here that have venues and are dealing with audience, we're going to need some new roles to build audience competence. So what is going to be happening with front of house, turnover of venues, supplies, communication. All right, that was a lot for me. I'm going to pause And Lori, we're a little bit ahead of the game, that's actually great. So, no, sorry, cancel that, cancel my being ahead. I wanted to take you through one more thing that I think can be helpful to think about leading. So what I wanted to chat through is one more framework for you to think about. Again, those previous 4 buckets to think about what are the kinds of things that you need to think about in managing your team. This is a little bit, I want to kind of helicopter up a little bit to talk about leading overall, because all of you on this call, you all know the energy and labor just to kind of, we're in a time of uncertainty. How are we making decisions? What do we do? How do we proceed? And so I want to offer this up as a framework for you to look at. And I have sourced this from RHR International, which is a management consultant firm, and this resource is online. So how do we lead in a place of uncertainty? So how do we, when we don't even know what's happening or everything feels like it's on a 1 month, 2 month rolling change platform, how do we look at, how do we lead? And RHR suggests that you approach this in 4 ways. One is decide how you are going to inform your team, how you're going to connect, how you will guide, and how you will unite. So inform, connect, guide, and unite. So what does this mean? So inform, and previously, how I was saying, like, how real do you get with staff? How you want to kind of inspire and motivate, but at the same time, is it good to be really, really clear and transparent about the challenges? So inform is an important part of best practices for your leadership. Assess the challenges head on, share available data with your team as you're able to. Some things are confidential and you can't share everything, but if you can share it, share it. Acknowledge that we are in uncertainty. That might seem really obvious. It's like, well, people must know, but I think it's really good for your team to hear it from you. Counter those feelings of helplessness with focusing on the controllable. And I think that's for yourself as much as for your team. So yes, we don't know what's happening with XYZ. We can control ABC. So let's focus on the controllable. I'm about to get a cat climbing on me, sorry. Okay, that's gotta happen at least once per Zoom call. Focus on the controllable. I can move my cat out of the way of the screen. Okay, moving on. Also anticipating scenarios. So anticipate all those, which you are all doing. Arts, this is where the art sector, you're brilliant at coming up with contingencies and anticipating scenarios. And focus on your strengths. Do you kind of go back to like, what's our secret superpower? What are we really amazing at as a team or as an organization? Then connect. Reach out and give support, similar to what I was saying in that employee wellness side. Give reassurance. Give people the chance to safely express emotion or fear of what's happening. Ask others what they need. And this is a tough one for some leaders. Be honest in expressing your own feelings. Be really kind of clear about where you're at. Oh no, and then it happened. There we go. So this is where it's going to sound like some of these buckets are contraindicating the others. So it might be a case of like, well, if I'm trying to kind of keep people focused and keeping them productive, and then at the same time, I'm sort of saying that I don't know what's happening and I'm scared, that's a very vulnerable place to be. And I think what they're saying is that in these uncertain times, these are some ways to kind of display leadership. And then guide. This is whereas I'm asking you to inform people, to kind of keep them up to date, to ask them what they need, but the guide, this is where you as a leader, you're making decisions, you're pointing everybody in that right direction, you're helping people move forward. You provide a clarity and provide a focus. You may not know exactly what's happening in the next 3 to 5 years, but you can decide, okay, it might be a month. In the next month, we're going to focus on this. Maybe it's a week. Maybe if you're deep in terms of a crisis mode, maybe it's like, this is what we're going to do today. Provide that focus and clarity. Be realistic about what can be accomplished. Set a sense of urgency for what's important and provide that feedback. And then unite. And this is where I think for arts organizations, finding a shared purpose and connectedness, I think we're really great at this. looking at the art, looking at the mission of what we do, and instilling that sense of purpose can be a really positive thing. There. So now, Lori, after my false start, I'm going to just stop share. If you can just bear with me for a second. How do I get there? One moment. Okay, now the cat's gone. Okay, did that stop share? Sorry, I'm struggling here. Just one moment. There we go. Okay. All right. Now, Lori, would you like to unmute? It's so lovely to have you here. And I know the team will get Lori's video on screen as well. Okay. Hi. Okay. So I'm going to do a very quick intro of Lori, and then we're going to launch into some questions. And now's a great time for y'all to start thinking about some questions for Lori, or I know I just provided a lot of information. So you can start to feed some questions into Facebook, and the EPA team will feed those questions to Lori and myself. But first, I'd love for us to just take a pause to say hello to Lori. Lori is the first managing director of the National Arts Center Indigenous Theatre, working with artistic director Kevin Loring, building their first ever Indigenous season at the NAC in 2019. And before that, and this is when I met Lori, Lori was executive director of Western Canada Theatre in Kamloops. She also worked for the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the Ontario Native Women's Association, and sat on the BC Arts Council board as a member and as vice chair. And I saw a note about working in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan on Odyssey Productions and Broadway North Theatre Company. Lori is a member of the Silks Nation. Lori's late father, Len Marchand Sr., was the first Status Indian elected to Parliament and the first Indigenous federal cabinet minister, and he represented the riding of Kamloops Caribou. So Lori, thank you for coming today. Hello.
Hello.
So nice to see you.
Well, thank you for that great presentation, Jeanne. That was a lot of really great information.
Oh, thank you, Lori. I mean, I feel like the leaders today are the ones that are the superstars, as well as the artists and the staff members and the team members. So I'm happy to kind of help provide some offerings to see if they work with folks. And again, thank you again for coming today. I'm very conscious about how busy arts leaders are and arts managers and artists. So an extra big thank you. And the reason why chatting with the EPA team, and they suggested that we bring somebody in that's working in an arts organization right now, is to maybe talk a little bit about your experience in leading teams throughout this last year. And I understand some of your team are here today. So welcome and hello. And, you know, you and I have chatted a little bit about this, and we've got some areas that I just covered in the call, but I'm really, you know, I think it might be interesting for us to talk about the managing remote teams as a starting idea. So maybe if you could start just like a general question, and then I've got some specific questions for you. Can you paint a picture of what the span of the last year has been like when it comes to managing teams, and has it changed throughout the year?
Yes. We don't have a very large team. As you noted, like 2019 was our first season, so 2019, 2020. So unfortunately, the pandemic shut us down before we were even able to offer our full season. The season itself had been amazing. We did the Mushkamo Festival, which was basically a season in and unto itself in September. And so our team was pretty much ready to collapse at the end of September. Massive push to have, you know, all of that work. We took over, for those who don't know, we took over all of the stages at the National Arts Center with work from all four directions, coast to coast to coast, and as well as international. We held an international gathering. Cynthia, of course, and EPA was very involved in those international discussions. And so just to say, even, you know, we did the world premiere of Unikaktuat in January. We had some really amazing art on the stage, a co-production with Great Canadian Theatre Company of Kinalik, These Sharp Tools, and then shut down. So, you know, along with everybody else, we thought this was going to be, you know, a month, maybe two, and of course then it stretched out to, well, now. And you know, we've all heard the phrases of planning the unplannable. We started, as I say, as a small team. You know, like every organization, even though it's a large organization, the NAC had to deal with revenue disappearing and how to deal with that that impact. And so, you know, again, as similar organizations, anybody on contract or part-time, those staff members were, you know, unfortunately either not renewed or laid off. And, you know, the legal implication of laying people off for a certain period of time becomes permanent. And so, you know, there's dealing with all of that. The impact emotionally on the team of having people contract not renewed was also really high. You know, the impact on not being able to deliver our full season and having to cancel those contracts was really devastating, not only on us, but also on the artists. So, you know, I'll fast forward a little bit so that, you know, there's been adjustments in and along the way. We have managed to, through some special funding, bring on an associate producer, which is really great, looking to succession, in fact, with that position in mind. And we've been able to bring on an education coordinator, which has also been, so there's been really positive, you know, some steps that where we have been able to move forward. Interestingly, both of those individuals have been working remotely. So in another world, we would have been asking them to move and relocate, and but in this instance, that's not the case. So as you say, like when the pandemic lifts, will we be looking to ask them to move, or will we be saying, this is great? The National Arts Center was originally built in like 1969. They thought there'd be 30 people running the building. There's over 350. So space is at a premium. Anybody who came into our offices, we were working in little cubicles most of the time without natural light. So there, you know, there's a lot of pluses to working at home and being a bit more in control of your own environment. But of course, the challenges are exactly some of the things that you listed in terms of checking in on each other and communicating, you know, sharing ideas, and that, you know, the synapses that happens when you're together in a room and exchanging ideas. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, thanks, Laura. And I think it is interesting, yeah, I mean, think about in March, like the shows that shut down with no notice. And I've heard sort of story of sets just left on stage and for the longest time. And there's just there's an ultimate time and the emotional impact for the team, obviously for the folks that have either lost their contracts or laid off, but the ones that stayed. So that, I mean, there's an overall grief of like, just, I mean, change is difficult, change is hard. So I think, you know, when it comes to communication, I think, and I sort of keep talking about different organizations have had different patterns. So like, you know, right now, in theory, we're in pandemic Q5, and some folks, they may not have been in production this summer anyway, so things didn't really impact them until September. And so every organization, I feel, is having their own different cycle in terms of the pandemic. But when it comes to communication and decision making, and I think it must be interesting because you're a unit within a very large institution. What were some of the main things when it comes to communication decision making? What were the main things that you and your team changed either once it got started, or did you then change to get work done? Were you looking at online tools? Did you have new meeting structures? And any advice for folks here about how to approach this?
Maybe I'll just say that I myself have walking into Superstore overloads my senses, and I personally have to turn around and walk out.
Right.
So going completely online actually has been really difficult for me to manage exactly that, because I think there were a flurry of responses. The standards are email, cell phone, Zoom.
Yeah.
And then the kind of the responsibility to share what's going on with the company on social media. So adding on to that, trying out Slack, trying out Asana, where is that communication coming into you from? The NAC as an institution made the decision just recently in the last, just basically the last month, maybe two, to migrate to Office and Teams, Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
And so in a way, that decision for the organization has been helpful, because they've had the capacity to say, this is the structure that we're using, and then we can adjust our work strategy. It's still very much in process in terms of where the files are shared, the Google Docs, all of that. Having those decisions, making those decisions, and saying, we as a team are communicating here. We as a team are storing our documents here. Email is external, internal communications is on Teams. Some sort of strategy. Controlling what you can control is absolutely one of my main mantras. So again, I personally say, I look at email, usually at this point throughout the day, but it usually is at the start of the day, after meetings, and at the end of the day. So that's something I can control. I do get the little, so I choose which notifications I receive and when. With another strategy, my team and those close to me know that, like Cynthia LeSage knows that if she really wants to get my attention, text is the best way.
Yeah.
So that's some of the strategies. We meet, we do check-ins. We started with 3 times a week, and then we found that we could manage with 2 times a week, and they are truly free-for-alls. They are what's going on with you, what are the things that we can help with as a team, how are you feeling, anything you want to share. It's a very, very open check-in, and like I think we do that twice a week.
Yeah.
We're very much missing the interactions in the halls or dropping into the office, finding that, that the timeline is divided up into hours, because Zoom meeting or Microsoft Teams meeting, hour, and dedicating that whole hour to the discussion, because that's what's in the calendar, as opposed to almost driving through the agenda and stealing back half an hour or even 15 minutes. So, so those are some of the things I think that the nuances we're discovering as we go through this.
Yeah, the blocks of time is fascinating. It's kind of like early days of online calendars, where when they defaulted to an hour, you were having an hour meeting, and it's like, why are we having an hour meeting? And it's like, well, because the calendar system told us it's an hour meeting. And it's the same thing with Zoom. I agree. Like it's very formal and it's very structured, as opposed to that, like, let's talk about this and see where the conversation goes. I mean, sort of similar to like what would happen in a rehearsal hall, right? You have a schedule, but then what happens in that room, in that block of time, who's to say where that goes? What's interesting to me, so let's talk about decisions, because I know, and again, part of the NAC. So how many are on your team in your, I'm not sure if it's a unit or a department, like how many are on in your team on staff? Right.
So I'll just say there's Kevin, there's myself, Samantha McDonald, our producer. We just managed to bring on Sage Wright as the associate producer. The wonderful Carrie Corbiera as our education coordinator, Mari Broadcoupe as a cultural resident. And then we actually, so Peter Line and RJ Mitchell live in the production, but they're our team. So we bring them in, and then so we try to be really inclusive. We bring in folks from HR, from marketing, particularly other Indigenous folks, Black people of color who need a place to gather and talk. So in those sharing meetings, we're pretty open about who comes.
Great. So when it comes to, again, your team and then the NAC, do you find that you're making decisions in a new way? Are you doing that differently? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
And I'm not sure. I'm not, I will say that we as a team are, there's definitely a new lens.
Yeah.
And we're really trying to place care at the top of that. So we set up a go, no go list for shows, and we established clear timelines about when we felt comfortable saying go or no go. As a department, we had control over that. Nobody else was externally saying this is when you have to decide. We had that control. Different departments made decisions differently.
Yeah.
As I said, when looking at, I think we, I don't know, I've been puzzling about this. So, yeah. But it is exactly that, like trying to set the framework, right? So what is the timeline? Who does this decision impact? How can we make sure everybody is taken care of as best as possible in this decision? So those are probably the large overarching parameters. Yeah. Is there, for the next season, we've built in what we call transitional programming, so that there is a built-in plan B, plan C.
Right. Plan
so
C.
If option A doesn't work, then we have a built-in B. And there's a timeline associated with
well, and I think that's interesting, because I think, this is slightly off topic, but only remotely off topic, chatting with folks about what is strategic planning and planning these days. And I think what you're talking about, I love the idea of whether it's a plan or not, you've got a framework of questions or a framework of these are the things we need to consider, and which will also, I think the why of things is very important these days.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so kind of looking at, well, the usual kind of things that contribute to a go, no go. And believe me, I love a good go, no go list, because I think it actually is you can still crackle with ideas, and one of them forms into a yes, and then you roll with it, as opposed to some are still in idea phase. But I think now kind of understanding what feeds into that, I think is good. And I love to hear that what you're saying about is making space for a number of different things, not just it's going to be here in this theater and we're going to have to block off 80% of the seats and we're going to have to do this. Because I think we can get mired down in, and believe me, all of the pieces about opening up in COVID and on the health and safety are very, very, very challenging, but that can become our focus as opposed to what stories should we be bringing forward, who should be there, and who should we be bringing to the table, as well as following all those safety protocols.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, you answered this a little bit, but the feeling connected, and as you talked about, I call it like the crackle time, when you just sort of like, people are at the coffee maker or they're eating their lunch, and that's how the ideas become really, really well formed. Or it's, at the coffee shop that's like a block down from the office. That's where like all the really important conversations happen. What do you think about staying connected? What do you think about ways? And I mean, do we as leaders, should we kind of, do you try to kind of go, well, now we will have creative ideation time, like that piece about where also it's kind of not intervening in it as leaders, like letting staff cook on things and work on things. But do you think in a way we should kind of go, this is actually going to be social hour and we're going to play a trivia game and this is a part, or what do you do? Like, what do you do about that connectedness?
I wish I had a really clear way to express that. Yeah. I think that there is a bit of a personal component of this.
Yeah.
So, we have a really wellness and emotional well-being falls into all of these topics. And because grief, truly, the loss of the programming and having to cancel things and frankly, losing folks, right? That grief and loss has been very profound and very, very real. And, at that time, like we just want to prioritize taking care of each other. And so that is why like the two or the three, the check-ins, those personal check-ins, were the first things that we set up. Beyond that, yes, I mean, we have fallen into saying this time we are, this is when we're going to talk about programming. This is when we're going to talk about this idea. This is when, so that there's like a few general meetings and then a real offshoot saying, okay, we've determined that this is a solid idea. We're going to pursue it. So it has its own meeting where we're going to talk about just that thing. And then we can start building in the specifics in and around that idea. Yeah. I guess as much as possible, it's like layering in.
Yeah, I love that, because I actually think, and it might sort of sound, well, from 3 to 3:05, we're going to talk about our feelings, but I actually, and then from 3:05 to 3:15, we're going to make decisions. I'm being glib about it, but in a way, if folks know, okay, there is a time where I can be really real and I can share if I want to, but there will be another time, like I actually need answers to these questions so that I can do my work. And I think being really clear about it is super helpful, because I think that's when, if you don't allow for especially right now, I think grief, using your word, grief is like such a good word for it. If you don't allow for that, it's going to be really hard to get work done, because it'll just kind of, at some point, it'll bear down. Yeah. I wanted to
doing those, just doing those little check-ins, right? Like, as you say, like when the camera is on and you can see the people, I think we're doing our best to read expressions and tone and, what's not said as much as what is said. I like, and trying to stay connected with our family, with our friends, and I have my own little checklist of priority, right? And just and being real with myself about saying my personal energy is going to allow me to do this and this, and this is just, it's just going to have to wait, right? and it's partly being realistic, partly a bit of that self-care, because yeah, if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of anybody else?
Yeah. And I think that's been a great thing, because I think in our sector, we can tend to just kind of like, no, work more, work more, work more. And I love that
Totally.
kind of going, okay, let's pause. Laura, I'm gonna ask one more question, then we've got some great questions coming in, and I'm just watching. We've got about 10 minutes left with our time together. And I wanted to ask you, and listen, I'm a settler, so I want to ask this question with deep respect. Do you have thoughts about leading teams within the NACs, that first Indigenous theater department or unit or team? Are there things to think about leading teams as it relates to Indigenous ways of knowing and ways of relating to one another?
Absolutely. I think when I started out, I didn't really think about my leadership style, the team that I liked building and working with, as being connected to my culture. But like it really, and I will say part of it is, anybody who heard my part speech, like part of it is as a mom, as a as a woman, that I think, again, starting my career in the early 80s, being thrust into leadership positions at a very young age. I look back now and go, oh my gosh, how could they have even asked me to take that on? But they did. So, and it was great. But it did. There were challenges really early on in terms of how I personally wanted to lead, and a lot of it came back to, well, the circle, right? And building, I've mentioned the circle of care. I've mentioned like wanting to make sure that we're collaborating, wanting to make sure that every voice is valued, that we collectively are hearing each and every voice, and all of and making room for that collectivity. And I think that that's incredibly important. I think that, again, we as a team have certainly listened. We've had the great privilege of working with the elder Annie Smith Saint George, and she's been kind enough to spend time with us and chat with us, and but just making sure that time, that care, that framework, because we are a group of disparate nations also that have come. So like, there isn't, as we know, there's not like sort of one cultural approach. So it is about making space for each person to reflect that in their own way, and bring it forward into our team, into our discussions, as is appropriate for them.
Yeah.
So it's been, apart from that, like I'm just so grateful to have had some really tremendous examples of leadership, particularly strong Indigenous women who have been real mentors and leaders and inspirations for me personally.
That's great. Thank you, Laurie. We've got some questions. How can you balance contribution from team members alongside efficiency when working virtually? So how do you balance contribution from team members alongside efficiency when working virtually?
With care. It is, I do, that's hard, because it's so difficult online to send signals, like when somebody is maybe taking up a little bit too much space, you can't really give them the nudge, or it's really difficult to just catch their eye, because you're catching everybody's eye.
The intake of breath, like in the room.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it is, I find also that, we're just in a careful way trying to make sure that we're aware of the time frame that we have for this specific discussion, which goes a little bit back to what I was saying about layering in discussions, right? So the purpose of the meeting is specifically this. If something comes up that needs to be discussed further, then we set aside a further time. So a lot of times it is just recognizing that, saying that is a great idea. Let's follow it through and let's talk about it here. So in a circumstance where we weren't sort of boxed in by these hour meetings, that it might evolve differently, but it is much like we would in a talking circle, making sure that everybody's voice is heard, doing it very diligently, specifically, purposely, intentionally, and then making space for those ideas that do come up, or the other items that need discussion, and identifying.
Yeah, that's great. And here's we've got another great question. What are some tips for building team cohesion while virtually interviewing or onboarding new members to an organization? I mean, this is happening a lot. I mean, I think we've seen leaders like new EDs and CEOs who have not met staff and not set foot. We've got new team members that you're hiring completely virtually and you're onboarding virtually. So what are some tips about, and I might split this question because it's about team cohesion, but I think it's also a question of like, how do you do recruitment in that virtual environment?
It's been tough. I see with Sage, we spent a long time looking for her. And really grateful that we found somebody with her skills and capacity who was willing to come and join our team. The onset of the pandemic really interrupted what we had planned. And so it was a series of emails and a series of conversations, and then bringing her into, again, that team environment. So oh my gosh, we just hired, I'm super excited we've just hired a director of diversity, and being in those interviews, she's going to be starting May 8th, and I'm just working with a few folks to create that onboarding package and what that is going to mean. But I know for our team, specifically bringing them into that, introducing them to the check-ins, and making sure that they feel safe to express viewpoints, to ask questions, to truly say, so some of it, like, here's my cell, if you need me, you text. Yeah. So it has been a bit of repetition. It has been, purposely setting up individual meetings and making sure that they are meeting the folks that they know. And again, normally, it'd be inviting those folks for coffee and doing the introductions, and instead it's doing it virtually.
Exactly. No, and I agree. Like, I find communication should always have multiple pathways, and we just need to still do those multiple pathways of COVID. I'm going to do one more question. I'm kind of hoping, looking deep at team. I'm not getting I don't have any like exclamation marks in my private chat. So I'm going to do one more question. And this is a really, really, really great question. So you've mentioned that post-COVID, there'll be substantial changes in leadership, structures, and organization. Given the social justice movements that have coincided with COVID, what resources would you recommend for arts leaders to integrate the necessary changes in leadership models and styles alongside the crucial changes needed to have greater ED&I integration with their organizations and teams?
I will say that there are a number of places where we're starting to gather those resources. I'm actually looking forward to connecting with Cynthia to figure out where we can start housing them so that they are available widely and we can share them. Interestingly, like out of it, I mentioned the gathering that we had during Mushkamo of the international artists. So we've just had some really great discussions and interchanges with through collaboration with the Canada Council and the Australia Arts Council. Some great discussions with Rhoda Roberts, who's just finished up at the Sydney Opera House. An organization that I'm involved with, the PACT, Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, is working actually as part of the recent negotiations we just completed on the Canadian Theatre Agreement. I was honored to work with what we call the Article 10 Committee, which was a group of folks from both the equity artist side as well as the theater side, who were Indigenous, Black, people of colors. And we collectively met to create this Article 10, which is a full article within the Canadian Theatre Agreement that now deals with hiring and hiring artists and producing work that is requiring has a cultural context and requires cultural care, cultural consultation. And it outlines a good deal of those considerations. But it has also called for the creation of an online library of resources for companies who have been asked in this agreement to write a public statement at the beginning of every season and post it publicly. So I think we're all learning as we go through this. As I mentioned, I worked, as you mentioned in the intro, I worked for the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I worked for the Ontario Native Women's Association. These are things that have been in discussion for a long time. I'm super hopeful. That we are now seeing real change in terms of leadership, in terms of institutional construction. There's a great document that's been going around the music industry that is talking about the characteristics of a colonized versus decolonized organization. So a lot of these, like I say, we're just trying to find the best way to post and share so that everyone has wide access. I think there have been multiple discussions, some really great resources created, and now we just need to make sure that we're sharing them and sharing that knowledge.
I think that's wonderful. And instead of, a lot of organizations doing that same work. The one thing, if I may, I'll just add from an HR point of view, and then I'm going to close, is I think and this is such a great question. I think the way to kind of make sure that there's greater EDI integration is that there's integration at the top in terms of that this is part of your strategic plan and your strategy and the work that you're doing. It's not kind of here's this committee and the work over here. I love what you're talking about in terms of that portal, because that adds a layer of accountability. And when it comes to looking at those hires, it's not just kind of, first of all, it's looking at how you're doing that recruiting. And then it's also that onboarding and how does the organization set everybody up for success after the fact.
Right. I've created basically a one pager of quick quotes. And, one of the ones I keep repeating is like, you can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. So if you want leadership from the Indigenous or Black or people of color, then you need to be making those connections, having the relationship with the community, and making sure that outreach is inclusive. it is something that is so, it's one of those things that, again, coming from the background that I do, that was very instinctive for me, that I was shocked when I was working for organizations where that wasn't understood, that my saying, well, if you want the Indigenous folks to come, then yes, you need to, talk to the Indigenous folks. So
that's how that works. Yes, exactly.
but we'll say that was 20 years. That was so 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We
Well, yes. Thank you so much. I'm not sure, IPA folks, Dave, do you need to do an outro, or do you want me to close off the session? I'm not sure. I'll just need a sign from the IPA folks. Okay, and we've gone over, but Lori, what an absolute pleasure. I'm a super fan, and love having this conversation. Again, I know how busy folks are, and asking folks to go on camera once again. I think that's Dave. Dave, do you want to pop in? Love having this conversation, and again, I know how busy folks are, and asking folks to go on camera. I think that's Dave. Dave, do you want to pop in?
Sure. I just wanted to say, thank you to both of you today for, sharing some, really, really insightful information for everyone. And I wanted to also acknowledge your gifts that you bring here, like Lori, like speaking about, your experience and talking about, the indigenizing and bringing that into the workplace, and going from a colonized to a non-colonized situation. Like it's very eye-opening. I see a lot of growth in that area, especially from where I'm coming from, where we were building, and we were building from that stage. So it's very, very interesting to see that. And with the HR, Jeanne, with all the things that the changes that we've been going through, in the industry, and that, whatever we can do to help one another to move on to the next day, it's always a good day, and to be there and to help one another to, to support each other the best way that we can. So again, thank you to both of you, fantastic. Thank you all for all your great work. And if you have any last words, now it's our time.
I'll just say thank you to you, Dave, and thank you to IPA for organizing this great opportunity. Thank you to Jeanne for leading the session, and thank you all for participating.
Yeah, and again, another thank you. I'm very honored to be here, and really happy to reach out and work with IPA and IPA members. So thank you. Again, another thank you. I'm very honored to be here, and really.
Okay, so we'll leave it as that. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for everyone that attended here today. And I do hope that we can follow up with some further discussions as we go along. So thank you to all of you, and we'll see each other again.
Maybe I'll hear you say it.